MH370, lost or hidden. The vanishing, when a 777 simply disappears. It begins in the silence of the early morning hours. Saturday, March 8th, 2014, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Malaysia Airlines, Flight 370, a Boeing 777 bound for Beijing, lifts off into the night sky. 239 souls are on board. Within the first hour, all is normal. Routine chatter between air traffic controllers in the cockpit. Then at 1:19 a.m. MYT, what seems like an ordinary sign-off, "Good night, Malaysian 370. It would be the last words ever heard from the flight. And then, it's gone. No emergency calls, no mayday, no wreckage. Just silence. Before we go deeper into the mystery of MH370, it's important to understand two key systems that carried the aircraft's digital voice to the outside world: ACARS and SATCOM. These terms are often mentioned, rarely explained, and widely misunderstood. ACARS, short for Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, is essentially the aircraft's automated messaging service. It sends and receives short data bursts, things like engine health reports, position updates, maintenance codes, and routine operational messages. Think of ACARS as a text message dispatcher for the aircraft. It doesn't rely on a single connection method. Instead, it automatically chooses the best available link: VHF radio when the aircraft is near land, HF radio over oceanic regions, SATCOM when satellite service is needed. ACARS runs quietly in the background. The pilots don't have to type these messages. It's all automated unless a manual request is made. When ACARS stops transmitting, the airplane doesn't talk anymore. That is exactly what happened on MH370 after 0107 UTC. SATCOM, or satellite communications, is a separate system. While ACARS uses SATCOM as one of its pathways, the hardware that talks to the satellite is a different piece of equipment entirely. On MH370, this was handled by the Satellite Data Unit, the brain that manages all satellite communication. SATCOM can be used for ACARS data messages, phone calls from the cockpit, aircraft systems that require satellite connectivity. But SATCOM only becomes visible to the ground when it is actively logged into the satellite network. A powered SDU by itself doesn't automatically mean there's an active session. It needs to either 1. Be instructed by another system to log in, 2. Respond to a specific request from the satellite network, or 3. Receive a manual or automatic trigger that establishes a channel. When MH370 disappeared from civil radar, both ACARS and SATCOM fell silent. Hours later, at 1825 UTC, the SDU unexpectedly came back online in what appeared to be a full power-up event, initiating a new handshake with the Inmarsat satellite. That handshake, not ACARS, is what gave investigators the hourly pings used to calculate the aircraft's mysterious path. The distinction is critical. ACARS is the messenger. SATCOM is one of the networks it uses. The SDU is the satellite modem that enables SATCOM. They are interconnected but not identical. MH370's disappearance becomes more puzzling because ACARS stopped sending messages after 0107. SATCOM also went silent, no sessions, no handshakes. Then the SDU shows a signature consistent with an electrical interruption and reboot at 1825, hours after everything went dark. This separation, one system not returning, the other briefly doing so, is central to understanding why MH370's final hours remain one of the most perplexing aviation mysteries of the modern era. The timeline: 1641 UTC 0041 MYT, departure Malaysia Airlines, Flight MH370 lifts off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, bound for Beijing with 239 people on board. The climb out is normal. Radio calls are routine. The aircraft tracks northeast toward waypoint Igari along airway R208, 1707 UTC 0107 MYT. ACARS message. ACARS transmits its scheduled engine and systems data packets to Malaysia Airlines operations. No irregularities. This message contained engine and systems data automatically sent during climb. Malaysia Airlines ACARS was configured to report every 30 minutes. Therefore, actual last 0107, expected next 0137. This is the final ACARS report ever received. The expected 0137 was never sent. This non-transmission means the ACARS was disabled or interrupted somewhere in the window of 0107 to 0137 MYT. No failure codes, no partial packet. 17-1924 UTC 1-1924 MYT. Handoff to Vietnam. ATC. Kuala Lumpur Area Control instructs MH370 to contact Ho Chi Minh ACC on the next frequency as it approaches the FIR, Flight Information Region, boundary. 17-1930 UTC 1-1930 MYT. Final radio contact. Good night, Malaysian 370. 1721 UTC 0121 MYT. Transponder goes offline. Less than 2 minutes after that last transmission, MH370's Mode S transponder stops transmitting. The aircraft disappears from civilian ATC radar. No distress call, no squawk, no emergency message. The transponder goes silent near the Igari waypoint over the South China Sea. Civilian radar loses the aircraft completely. When the transponder stopped, MH370 didn't vanish, it simply stepped out of the modern surveillance system. Civil controllers lost its identity in a heartbeat, leaving only raw military radar echoes to mark its path across the night sky. Commercial aircraft carry a device called a transponder. Its only job is to respond to radar interrogations with information. The aircraft's identity, its altitude, and often its unique Mode S data. When the transponder is working, air traffic controllers see a labeled, fully identified target on their screens. If the transponder is switched off, disabled, or loses power, that identification disappears instantly. This is exactly what happened on MH370 at 1:21. The aircraft didn't disappear, it simply stopped identifying itself, and without that digital return, the radar picture becomes much more primitive. Primary radar is the most primitive. Primary radar is the oldest type of radar, and the simplest. It sends out a pulse of energy and waits for the echo to reflect back from any solid object. It does not need cooperation from the aircraft. It does not require a transponder. It simply detects anything with enough surface area to reflect radio waves. Primary radar shows range, direction, sometimes rough altitude, depending on the system, but it shows no identity, just a raw, untagged blip. When MH370's transponder stopped, this was the only remaining way to detect it. Secondary radar, despite its name, is the system used by modern air traffic control. It interrogates the aircraft's transponder, and the transponder sends back who the aircraft is, how high it is. Additional Mode S data. Secondary radar is extremely accurate, but only if the transponder replies. So when MH370's transponder went offline, secondary radar lost it instantly. Primary military radar continued to see it as an unidentified echo. This explains why. Civil ATC lost the airplane. Military radar still detected it turning back across Malaysia. But no identity, altitude, or clean track was available. And why the publicly released military radar data is sparse, incomplete, and controversial. 1721 to 1737 UTC, 0121 to 0137 MYT, Malaysian military primary radar. Military radar observed a faint target. Instead of proceeding toward Vietnam, MH370 appears to turn sharply left, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula. It passes near the South China Sea coastline, then traverses the peninsula entirely. 1730 to 1737 UTC, 0130 to 0137 MYT. Flight crosses over Penang. Military radar shows the Boeing 777 flying toward Penang Island, making a gentle curve, and after passing Penang, the aircraft turns northwest toward the Andaman Sea. 1803 to 1815 UTC, 0203 to 0215 MYT. Last military radar returns, radar blips, traces, picked up by Malaysia and possibly Thailand, show MH370 heading toward the northern entrance of the Malacca Strait before disappearing into airspace with weak or unreleased radar coverage. This is the end of all known radar tracking. 1825 UTC, 0225 MYT, SATCOM, satellite communications. SATCOM terminal reboots and logs back on, highly anomalous. It is highly unusual during cruise and remains one of the most debated anomalies of the entire case. After the ACARS unit quit working, over an hour earlier, MH370 transmitted nothing. Then suddenly, at 1825 UTC, the aircraft's satellite link comes alive again. This Logon event marks the beginning of the mysterious Inmarsat data trail. 1839 UTC, 239 MYT. A phone call from Malaysia Airlines to the cockpit is routed through the satellite system. The call connects to the aircraft, but no one answers. The connection proves SATCOM is powered. 1941 UTC, 0341 MYT, the first of the approximately hourly satellite handshakes. The aircraft initiates an automated handshake with the satellite. This becomes the first point used to calculate BTO arcs, the distances from the satellite. 2041 UTC, 0441 MYT, second hourly handshake. Another automated handshake confirms the aircraft remains powered, connected, and in flight. No voice, no data packets, just the silent handshake signal, 2141 UTC, 0541 MYT. Third hourly handshake, the aircraft continues flying. The Doppler value begins to diverge from a stable signature, indicating a long-range trajectory, 2241 UTC, 641 MYT. The fourth hourly handshake, 0019 UTC, 819 MYT. Fifth partial handshake, a final signal, not a full handshake, is transmitted. This Logon request is believed to indicate a power interruption or fuel starvation event, moments before the aircraft system shut down permanently. This is the last known electronic exchange from MH370. For families waiting at Beijing Capital Airport, hours become days. Phone calls ring endlessly. Some even connect, but there's no sound, only the eerie open line of a phone still powered on somewhere, in some unknown place. Around the world, experts gather to analyze the disappearance. Search vessels, aircraft, and satellites are mobilized. The Indian Ocean becomes the stage for one of the greatest mysteries of modern aviation, but as the search expands, so does the confusion. Every direction brings contradiction. Radar blips, satellite arcs, ocean currents, and the question no one can escape. How can an airliner this sophisticated simply vanish? Was MH370 lost or hidden? The official story, the satellite data we all believed. The official investigation soon finds its anchor in one unusual data set. The Inmarsat satellite handshakes. When Flight 370's transponder stopped, another system kept whispering in the dark, the aircraft's SATCOM terminal. Every hour or so, it sent tiny automated pings, digital handshakes to the Inmarsat D3F1 satellite orbiting 22,000 miles above the Indian Ocean. These pings carried no voice, no GPS coordinates, only timing and frequency offsets, subtle clues that engineers call BTO and BFO. When plotted on a globe, these offsets created the now famous 7 arcs, rings representing where the aircraft might have been each hour after contact was lost. The final arc became the assumed crash line deep in the remote southern Indian Ocean. Although investigators often refer to the 7th arc, only 4 to 5 of the satellite arcs actually contain clean, usable data for flight path analysis. The term 7th arc simply marks the final partial handshake at 8:19 MYT. The whole investigation depends on one satellite. No triangulation, no redundancy. One oscillator, one beam, one geometry. That single mathematical pattern shaped the entire global search. But despite all of it, no wreckage was found where those arcs said it should be. So, what if the foundation of that search, those numbers, those handshakes, was wrong? The data deception. Could the signal be a lie? At the heart of this mystery lies a single unsettling idea: spoofing. Spoofing is the art of imitation, creating false signals so convincing they appear genuine. It's been done with GPS ships in the Black Sea, with aircraft transponders over conflict zones, and even in laboratory SATCOM tests. If MH370's handshake data was spoofed, it means the aircraft's apparent southern path was a digital illusion, a misdirection, and it would explain the one glaring contradiction that has haunted the official story since the beginning. Despite the most expensive ocean search in human history, no confirmed debris was ever found where the Inmarsat data pointed. Were these genuine fragments carried by current, or planted evidence reinforcing a false narrative? No one can say for sure. But we do know this. The southern trajectory depended entirely on the integrity of data that has never been independently verified. It begins with the fundamental question: could the search area be wrong? Could the data have been spoofed? How the search area was derived is very important. The official search area was chosen almost entirely based on Inmarsat handshake pings between the aircraft's SATCOM terminal and the Inmarsat I3F1 satellite. These pings are used to estimate burst timing offset BTO and burst frequency offset BFO, which are then interpreted as distance arcs and Doppler-based velocity estimates. The famous 7 arcs are drawn from this dataset, why spoofing is plausible. SATCOM pings can be simulated if you can mimic the aircraft's SATCOM terminal handshake using the right terminal ID. These pings do not contain positional GPS data, they are only timing and frequency offsets. A skilled operator could, in theory, inject false handshake data that appears consistent with a flight path going south, even if the aircraft went north. Weak points in the official data reliance. No independent cross-check of the raw Inmarsat dataset has been made public. What is released are derived products, plots, and summaries. Inmarsat's own engineers admitted the northern track was possible in early analysis, but was discarded based on traffic and probability, not proof. The BFO Doppler data is extremely sensitive to assumptions about the aircraft's speed, heading, and even SATCOM antenna stability. BTO arcs could be spoofed by a relay or intermediate transmitter. Known spoofing false data precedents. ADS-B spoofing, seen in multiple conflicts, especially in Syria and Eastern Europe, where false transponder positions are fed into civil tracking networks. SATCOM test injections. Certain SATCOM terminals have been spoofed in lab conditions for testing authentication. GNSS spoofing. GPS position spoofing is well documented, particularly in maritime regions around China and Russia. Could the aircraft be where no one looked? The northern shadow route, the flight path. No one followed. The official search teams looked south, but early Inmarsat engineers quietly admitted a northern fit also worked. Why? Because the north was politically complicated. It passed over the airspace of India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Western China, and Kazakhstan. To acknowledge that path meant asking dozens of governments to open their defense logs. So, the easier story won. It must have gone south. Yet radar coverage shows gaps, black corridors where no public radar return exists, over the Andaman Sea, across northern Myanmar, over sparsely monitored regions of Tibet and western China. These are the corridors through which an aircraft could pass unseen. Imagine the sequence. After the last civilian radar contact, MH370 flies west across Malaysia, dips low, then climbs northwest along the Andaman Sea. Instead of turning south into emptiness, it continues north, slipping between radar networks that were never looking for a Malaysian jet. By dawn, the 777 could be hundreds of miles inland, beyond the point where any conventional search would ever look. Could it land there? Yes. In the deserts of Kazakhstan, western China, and northern Pakistan lie dozens of airfields long enough for a 777, remote, fenced, and hidden. Why the north route theory is plausible. A northern route towards Central Asia, Kazakhstan, western China, or even an airfield in a more remote area fits with the lack of confirmed debris in the southern search zone. The debris found, flaperon wing fragments, could have been intentionally placed or carried by ocean currents from another release point, months or years later. Spoofed Inmarsat arcs could easily have redirected search resources away from the real trajectory. We need to look at the following. The technical feasibility of spoofing the Inmarsat handshake data. Known alternate path scenarios north versus south. Inconsistencies in the debris timeline that support a diversion from the real crash site MH370. Inmarsat spoofing and alternate path possibilities. What the official story rests on. Key dataset Inmarsat I3F1 satellite handshake logs. Method relies on the concepts of BTO, burst timing offset, and BFO, burst frequency offset. BTO measures signal travel time, which give distance arcs but not direction. BFO shows Doppler shift caused by aircraft velocity and satellite movement, and is used to infer relative motion along the arc. Result: 7 arcs, from pings approximately every hour after 1825 UTC, plotted as concentric bands. The resulting arcs are not radar tracks but derived geometry. Problem: neither BTO nor BFO is proof of direction. Early Inmarsat engineers admitted north track fits were possible, but dismissed them due to traffic patterns in the north. Plotting the BTO circles, each equal delay as one possible distance ring, gives you the arcs. Then, the BFO values determine whether that arc solution lies to the north or south of the satellite's subpoint. If timing or frequency references were offset, mirrored, or spoofed, both north and south solutions could be misplotted. Later calibration favored the southern trajectory, yet that assumption rests entirely on trusted Doppler slope integrity. Later studies, independent group, Duncan Steele, and others, have found that even minor frequency bias changes, plus or minus 150 Hz, could flip early BFO interpretations. That's why some independent analysts still keep an open mind about a northern possibility, because those arcs depend entirely on trusting the integrity of the raw SATCOM data chain. The key point is, the BTO arcs only define range, not direction. The BFO slope decides which side of the satellite the aircraft was on. If either the oscillator frequency calibration or data timestamp sequence were misaligned, the directional interpretation, north versus south, becomes invalid. In other words, spoofed delayed, or relayed data could make a southern arc appear real when the path was elsewhere, or vice versa. If the 1825 UTC SATCOM Re-Login involved even a brief signal modification, say, an offset frequency or alternate transceiver, it could invert the BFO slope pattern that led Inmarsat to favor the southern route. That would make the northern arc mathematically indistinguishable in the raw timing data, even though it's physically on the opposite side of the satellite footprint. So the southern versus northern interpretation hinges entirely on those frequency offsets being authentic and uncompromised. If any part of the SATCOM data stream, the handshake metrics that define the arcs, was spoofed or distorted, both the northern and southern arcs could theoretically be inaccurate, because those arcs aren't direct radar plots, rather. They are mathematical constructs derived from a single satellite and its measurements. North arc context. When Inmarsat first plotted the seventh arc, they acknowledged two possible corridors consistent with the Doppler, BFO, and timing, BTO, data. Southern corridor across the Indian Ocean, the accepted route today. Northern corridor stretching across Thailand, Myanmar, China, and into Central Asia. The northern solution initially appeared plausible because the ping timing, distance to satellite, could fit either north or south. The BFO Doppler shift was ambiguous before full calibration. Radar coverage across northern Southeast Asia was patchy or inconsistent in early 2014. Only after Inmarsat's Doppler compensation analysis, March 14th to 24th, 2014, did they conclude that the frequency shift better matched a southern trajectory, but that conclusion depended on several model assumptions about aircraft velocity, heading, and antenna bias. Within days, the global consensus fixed on a southern crash site. Billions were spent mapping the Indian Ocean floor. But the northern route, where radar and satellite blind spots converged, remains unsearched to this day. Was the aircraft truly on the southern arc, or was the data shaped to make it appear that way? Each missing fragment, each data gap, each silent radar screen may hold a piece of the truth. As analysts examined the gaps left by radar and satellite coverage, one possibility stood out, a scenario few dared to publish publicly. When we line up the anomalies chronologically, a pattern begins to form, one that challenges the accepted narrative. 1707 UTC, 0107 MYT, the last ACARS message. Transmission ended without failure reports, but the SATCOM link remained capable of reconnecting later. 1730 to 1822, a complete radar gap across western Malaysia and the Andaman Sea. No confirmed tracking data, just silence in a region typically covered by military radar. 1825 UTC, the SATCOM Re-Login. This is the key event, possibly a spoof injection point, where the aircraft's communication handshake could have been synthetically generated or redirected. 1941 to 0011 UTC, the Inmarsat pings plotted only to the south, yet analysts confirm a northern solution was mathematically viable but dismissed. Satellite and commercial imagery from MODIS and Maxar showed missing granules and coverage gaps across the Bay of Bengal and the northern corridor, many labeled cloud-obscured, despite clear weather reports that day. India's radar data was reviewed internally but never released. No radar hits, no raw logs, just a statement that the data was examined. And finally, the debris trail found years later, far to the west, on Reunion and Madagascar, without a single fragment recovered from the official southern search zone. The North Theory. The theory suggests that Flight 370 never went south at all. Instead, it flew north, while a sophisticated spoofing operation redirected the satellite data, creating the illusion of a southern path. The core hypothesis is simple, yet staggering. The Inmarsat handshake arcs that drove the billion-dollar Indian Ocean search were not genuine reflections of the aircraft's motion, but fabricated signals, engineered to mislead investigators and the public. The key moment, 1825 UTC. That was the SATCOM Re-Login event, the point where the system reconnected after an hour of silence. If false pings were injected here, the trajectory could be mirrored south while the aircraft continued north through a series of radar and satellite blind spots stretching from Malaysia through Pakistan and Xinjiang all the way to Kazakhstan. These blind corridors align with known radar dead zones and unsearched areas. Across the north route, MODIS and commercial imagery, image not communication satellite, showed unexplained data suppression patterns, missing granules and cloud-obscured sectors on otherwise clear days. Whether coincidence or concealment, the pattern is undeniable. Technically, the spoof is feasible. Inmarsat arcs are derived from timing and frequency offsets, not GPS. With the right equipment, access to terminal IDs, and an uplink path, simulated handshakes could have been generated mimicking the 7 pings that define the official southern route. Such precision would require high-capability actors, entities with access to both communications networks and classified satellite infrastructure, such as defense contractors, signal intelligence teams, black program specialists. If that occurred, the southern search may have served as a global distraction while the true flight path was quietly contained. It's a theory that shifts the focus from the Indian Ocean to the silence of the skies above Central Asia. A theory that, if true, reframes not only the investigation, but the very narrative the world was allowed to see. Evidence aligns with a northern route plus spoof theory, requiring controlled data manipulation and coordinated narrative management. To understand the real mystery of MH370, you have to picture the world the way the satellite sees it, not the way we see it on a flat map. Above the equator at roughly 64 degrees east, the Inmarsat IOR satellite sits in geostationary orbit. It does not move, it does not drift. It just stares down at the Earth, fixed over the Indian Ocean. Now imagine MH370 on the night of March 8th. After leaving Kuala Lumpur, the aircraft is north and east of the satellite's fixed point. As it turns back across the peninsula and heads toward the Andaman Sea, it remains within the same footprint. It never gets close to the boundary of any other satellite region. This is where the story splits into 2 very different narratives. In the official explanation, the aircraft turned south into the Indian Ocean. If that happened, the plane would steadily increase its distance from the satellite. The Doppler shift would trend downward as the aircraft moved away. And that is exactly the behavior investigators modeled. But if MH370 flew north instead, toward the Bay of Bengal, toward the Himalayas, toward Central Asia, the Doppler pattern reverses. First, the airplane moves toward the satellite. Then it crosses its latitude. Then it moves behind the satellite's beam, where Doppler becomes distorted or unreliable. 2 very different geometries, 2 very different Doppler signatures, and yet, all interpreted through a single satellite link. At 1825 UTC, something unusual happened. The aircraft's SATCOM terminal performed a cold reboot, essentially a reconnect. This alone is extraordinary because SATCOM does not just reboot in cruise flight. It normally stays powered and logged in for the entire duration of an international route. Investigators suggested that the SATCOM reboot might be the result of a power interruption or a transfer between electrical sources. But we must remember, the only way to know that definitively would be from cockpit voice data or the flight data recorder. Neither was recovered. What we do know is this: a SATCOM reboot resets the timing oscillator inside the satellite data unit. And that oscillator is the single component that sets the Doppler reference investigators relied upon to calculate arc positions. If anyone wanted to alter the Doppler signature, intentionally or unintentionally, the reboot is the moment where that shift begins. This is precisely where a spoofed signal or manipulated timing reference could redirect the arcs away from the aircraft's true path. With only one satellite and one line of sight, there is no redundancy to catch such a deviation. From a systems perspective, the 1825 reboot is the weakest link in the entire chain of evidence. Modern navigation systems assume redundancy. GPS uses dozens of satellites, ADS-B uses multilateration, military radar networks overlap. But in the case of MH370's SATCOM, the entire dataset, the distance arcs, the Doppler signatures, even the handshake timestamps, all came from one satellite, one ground station, one oscillator, one point of failure. This is important because the Northern Corridor, the route toward India, Nepal, Xinjiang, and Kazakhstan, passes through regions where both civilian and military data remain either unreleased, redacted, or unknown. These are areas with overlapping air defense radar systems that do not publicly disclose their tracks. If an aircraft were flying low, masked by terrain, or protected by selective non-disclosure, the absence of radar returns creates what investigators call a data shadow. Combined with a single satellite SATCOM link, that shadow becomes a corridor, an entire region where the aircraft's true path could diverge from the model and still appear consistent with manipulated satellite readings. This is why the northern route cannot be dismissed outright. Not because it is proven, but because the architecture of the communication system means it was never cross-checked. The satellite saw one path. Radar showed another. And in the gap between the two lies the space where the truth may still exist. The 1825 event. SATCOM login. Possible injection point. If someone manually powered down or disabled the transponder/ACARS suite but later re-enabled SATCOM, it would restore a data link capable of producing handshake pings without re-enabling normal messaging, ACARS, or voice. Permit spoofed or limited data exchange if an external unit or intermediary manipulated the signal or routing. This scenario aligns with an injection theory that the SATCOM channel may have been reinitialized by non-standard means, allowing synthetic handshakes or redirected routing tables to generate plausible Doppler data. Counter-arguments. The official ATSB and Inmarsat analyses suggest the 1825 UTC SATCOM logon corresponded to auxiliary power unit, APU restart after a main bus power transition, e.g., switching between electrical sources. No evidence of external command or spoofed packets in Inmarsat logs. However, the raw logs remain partly undisclosed, and multiple analysts have argued that burst timing offset, BTO, and burst frequency offset, BFO, values at that moment show anomalies inconsistent with a standard reboot. There is no definitive proof for an APU start. The only definitive indicators would be either FDR, flight data recorder parameters, engine APU status, electrical bus voltages, or cockpit voice confirming the action. Neither was recovered, so there's no mechanical proof the APU ever started. The APU explanation is essentially a placeholder for some electrical event occurred. The SATCOM logon proves power restoration, nothing more. It doesn't tell us how the power returned, nor why it had been removed in the first place. The APU restart explanation is a patch applied after the fact to make the timeline fit. It's not supported by any mechanical telemetry. What about engine data? MH370's Boeing 777-200ER used Rolls-Royce Trent 892 engines monitored through the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. Last complete engine snapshot, 1707 UTC 0107 MYT. both engines operating normally at cruise flight level 350. Nothing abnormal noted. Next scheduled transmission, 1737 UTC, was never received. This cessation marks the moment when ACARS stopped transmitting entirely, long before the transponder loss, 1721 UTC. From that point forward, no engine or system data was ever received by Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce should have continued receiving 30-minute reports automatically. The fact that those reports stopped means either ACARS was manually disabled, as per cockpit switch or circuit breaker, or SATCOM connectivity was interrupted, power removed from the SDU, or both. The later 1825 UTC SATCOM Re-Login did not reactivate the ACARS channel. That's critical. The satellite terminal came back online, but the ACARS application itself remained disabled. That's why no more engine health data ever reached Rolls-Royce after 1707 UTC. In the days after the disappearance, news outlets, and even some officials, misinterpreted a routine Rolls-Royce ping confirmation as proof that the engines continued sending data for hours. That story was later corrected. Rolls-Royce confirmed it received no further engine performance data after 1707 UTC. The later pings came only from Inmarsat system handshakes, not from the engines or ACARS. So, on the timeline, the 1825 UTC marker is the precise boundary between the radar phase, human observation, and the data-derived phase, Inmarsat modeling. It's the single hinge point where direct tracking ended and inferred tracking began. How spoofing could work. Key vulnerability: SATCOM handshakes don't contain positional GPS data. They are timing and frequency offsets between terminal and satellite. Possible spoofing method: clone terminal ID of MH370's SATCOM unit and inject handshake pings. False pings appear consistent with a southbound trajectory. Required access would include advanced RF equipment, knowledge of terminal ID, and access to SATCOM network, possible if insider or via ground station. Example precedent: ADS-B and ACARS test environments have successfully simulated aircraft traffic for training and testing. Why spoofing is plausible. No independent raw dataset review. All public data are derived or summarized. Northern path ignored prematurely. Early Inmarsat model allowed both north and south. The decision to favor south was political and resource-driven. Complex search zone selection narrowed using probabilistic assumptions, not hard location fixes. Northern route scenarios: Kazakhstan, Central Asia, large remote runways, plausible for covert landing or military interception. Xinjiang, Western China, tight airspace control, but possible if coordinated or concealed. Andaman Sea, Pakistan corridor, gaps in primary radar coverage at the time, possible transient corridor to northern route. There were multiple radar-related oddities during that period. Thai military radar did register an unknown aircraft at around 0128 MYT, 1728 UTC, moving west, which was later believed to be MH370, but the radar coverage thins dramatically north of the Andaman Sea. Indian radar systems on the Andaman-Nicobar chain were in standby mode that night, reportedly due to maintenance, leaving a gap in regional coverage. Myanmar and Chinese southern radar nets have not released any public data for that period. A few independent observers noticed short-lived radar echoes on some aviation tracking platforms in northern latitudes shortly after the disappearance window, but these were never verified as authentic returns and could have been ghost data. So the northern route remains a radar blind spot corridor where an aircraft could, in theory, have flown unobserved for significant stretches. Satellite anomalies. Early post-event analyses showed a transient L-band anomaly around the 1825 UTC Re-Logon, Iridium and Inmarsat network logs in adjacent sectors showed brief non-user spikes around the same epoch. These were likely cross-satellite noise, but created early confusion. There were reports of ground-based satellite flashes or irregular reflection detections near the Bay of Bengal region on March 8th to 9th, though no correlation was ever proven to MH370. The northern segment anomalies largely came from how Inmarsat's frequency offset model behaved at high northern latitudes. In some early drafts, a mirror solution produced a plausible track over Central Asia before the calibration was finalized. Why it is intriguing, when you overlay the northern arc radar blind spots, the timing of the SATCOM Re-Login, and the global increase in radar surveillance due to rising regional tensions, you find that the northern profile remains the least conclusively disproven portion of the analysis. There is no direct radar evidence there, only the modeling assumption that the Doppler pattern must indicate a southern path. Timeline disappears March 8, 2014. Military radar roll. The only verifiable returns after civilian radar loss came from primary radar systems in Malaysia, and later confirmed from Thai and possibly Indian radar. Those primary radar blips were never backed by transponder or ADS-B, so they depended entirely on military network interpretation. Regional situation. Multiple Southeast Asian air forces were running heightened surveillance exercises during that period. Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and the U.S. Navy's presence out of Diego Garcia. Thailand's later coup in May was preceded by months of internal tension, and radar air defense units were operating under tighter internal command review even before the formal takeover. Implication: the military radar chain was fragmented. Each nation's radar saw something, but nobody stitched it together promptly. For more than an hour after MH370's transponder went silent, the only systems capable of tracking the aircraft belonged not to civilian air traffic control, but to the militaries of the region. Malaysia, Thailand, India, and Indonesia all maintained long-range surveillance radars, systems designed to detect hostile aircraft, not simply watch commercial flights. These radars operate at high power across multiple bands and can track aircraft hundreds of miles out to sea. Yet the data released to investigators was not the crisp, continuous radar picture these systems are known to produce. What emerged instead was something far more limited. A hand-drawn arc, a string of points without timestamps, scattered returns with no altitude, and a final echo placed precisely at the edge of Malaysian FIR responsibility, as though the aircraft faded away at the perfect bureaucratic boundary. There were no raw frames, no Doppler velocity plots, no classification signatures, no elevation slices, nothing that a modern military radar would normally archive. Just the minimum. And every neighboring nation reported the same silence. Thailand acknowledged it had radar in the area that night, but didn't look at it. India, whose Andaman and Nicobar Command monitors the Bay of Bengal, said it saw nothing relevant and released nothing at all. Indonesia, which operates powerful radar in Sumatra, also reported no useful returns. The absence of this data is not a technical gap. It is an informational one. Because the truth is simple. Military radars do not conveniently go blind. Data does not vanish on its own. What investigators received was not the full picture, only the portion chosen for release. And in that silence, MH370 could have gone almost anywhere. When you overlay the MH370 Northern Arc possibilities, flight through Thai, Myanmar, or Chinese airspace, with the geopolitical radar activity in that same time frame, an interesting pattern emerges. Northern track would have intersected active radar coverage zones tied to China's southern defense net and Thailand's Western Corridor. By July, MH370 timeframe, that northern belt of radar monitoring across Asia-Eurasia was even more intense due to the Ukraine crisis and global defense alert status. In other words, 2014 was a year when military radar networks were on high alert globally, yet both Malaysia Airlines events, MH370 and MH17, revealed how fragile those detection and communication chains really were. Thailand coup d'etat. Date: May 22, 2014. Event: the Royal Thai Armed Forces, led by General Prayuth Chan-o-cha, seized control of the government from Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. Context: this was more than 2 months after MH370 disappeared, March 8, 2014. It followed months of political unrest and anti-government protests in Bangkok. Martial law was declared on May 20th, and the full coup occurred on May 22nd. The military suspended the Constitution, dissolved the Senate, and imposed curfews nationwide. Thailand's military radar coverage extends into the Andaman Sea, an area along MH370's westward turn. During early searches, Thailand confirmed that its radar had detected an unknown aircraft, but didn't initially analyze the data until Malaysia requested it days later. The later coup, May 2014, had no direct operational link to MH370, but it added complexity to data sharing and transparency within the region. Notable events for 2014, MH370. Disappearance, March 8, 2014. Thailand coup d'etat, May 22, 2014. MH17 shootdown, July 17, 2014. Regional instability and shifting military postures, Thailand's internal focus, Malaysia's crisis response, etc., formed part of the background noise in that same year, potentially affecting coordination and data flow in the days after the aircraft vanished. MH370 disappeared from radar less than an hour after takeoff on March 8, 2014. The search continued for years. Partial debris confirmed in 2015 to 2016. The main wreckage has never been found. Debris timeline inconsistencies. First debris, flaperon, was found on Reunion Island more than a year later. Other parts found scattered across Western Indian Ocean, Madagascar, Mozambique, South Africa. No confirmed debris from Southern Indian Ocean crash zone recovered by official search vessels. Suspicion: debris may have been released intentionally in the Indian Ocean to support Southern theory. Currents would disperse it westward over months. Strategic implication: if spoofing occurred, search resources intentionally misdirected. If northern route taken, search in Southern Indian Ocean was effectively a diversion. Satellite data credibility: SATCOM logs are vulnerable to manipulation. Without independent verification, they should not be treated as absolute. Why would the data be spoofed? This is the question that takes MH370 out of pure technical analysis and into strategic and political territory, the part that rarely gets explored in the mainstream narrative. If the Inmarsat arcs were deliberately spoofed, there had to be a motive big enough to redirect international search resources away from the true location, control public narrative about the aircraft's fate, ensure that the real path and outcome remained obscured, possibly indefinitely. The hidden motives: passengers, cargo, and secrets worth hiding. Possible motives for spoofing the Inmarsat data: 1. To protect the true landing, intercept location. If the aircraft went north, then it could have landed or been intercepted at a remote location, Central Asia, Western China, Pakistan corridor. Spoofing arc south would hide that location from search efforts. Why hide the landing site? Political sensitivity, covert operation, military involvement, hostage situation. 2. To avoid political fallout. If another state's radar had seen MH370 in their airspace but did not act, then the northern route exposure could embarrass or implicate them. Southern route spoofing would allow everyone to avoid responsibility, and the mystery shifts to the ocean. 3. To mask cargo or passenger significance. Cargo possibilities could be related to sensitive technologies and unreported electronic shipment. Sensitive passengers such as engineers, defense contractors, or intelligence operatives. The northern route spoof could facilitate delivery of cargo or passengers without public detection. Possible individual passenger motives on MH370. Technical, defense personnel. There were Freescale semiconductor employees on board, 20 engineers reportedly traveling to China. Freescale specializes in RF and radar technologies, stealth, jamming, secure comms. If specific individuals carried sensitive knowledge or designs, they could be the subject of a targeted extraction or interception. Northern route could allow for a controlled landing and retrieval. Possibility: individuals with unique technical knowledge or access to designs. Northern diversion could allow extraction of specific personnel, cargo custodians. There's long-standing speculation about unreported cargo, including possible high-value electronics. If cargo was being smuggled or diverted, the aircraft's track would need to be concealed from those expecting it in Beijing. A northern diversion could route the cargo to a party with the capability to spoof the data. Known cargo included lithium batteries, common. Unverified claims suggest additional unreported high-value electronics. Possibility: cargo intentionally improperly declared to avoid detection. Northern diversion could reroute to controlled facility. Political or intelligence figures. Passenger manifest included Iranian nationals traveling on stolen passports, officially labeled as migrants, but details remain fuzzy. Possible cover for intelligence operatives or courier activities. Certain passengers listed with background gaps in media disclosures. Unconfirmed reports of links to intelligence work in some passenger backgrounds. If an individual's capture or protection was priority, a covert diversion could remove them from public view. The southern arcs act as cover for disappearance. Potential unwanted witness. Scenario: if an incident occurred on board, accident, conflict, sabotage, involving a sensitive person, northern diversion allows containment. Southern spoof prevents investigation. Why the individual hypothesis fits the spoof theory. You don't need a conspiracy involving everyone, just a targeted removal of the aircraft to secure an asset or cargo. Misdirection, southern arcs, keeps the public, victims' families, and most governments looking in the wrong place. Fits known intelligence patterns, plausible disappearance, and controlled narrative. 4. To control narrative for intelligence purposes. Spoofing data buys time, keeps the real event under wraps while public attention is consumed by deep ocean searches. Similar tactic to false trails in other intelligence operations. Create a plausible but false official search to misdirect attention. Why Southern Ocean worked as a diversion. Southern Indian Ocean is vast, remote, inhospitable. Search can consume years and billions with zero risk of confirming or contradicting actual events. It created the illusion of action while effectively ensuring the true resolution was delayed indefinitely. The north route fits perfectly into this pattern. Spoof arcs south, this misdirects the search. Aircraft goes north with controlled recovery or disappearance. Debris appears years later that supports the false track. If a single person or small group on board was the key factor, it could explain why the event required complete control of the narrative, why the aircraft could not just disappear quietly, but had to be misdirected and hidden. Why multiple governments would accept the Southern Ocean story without hard proof? If all this speculation were to be true, then who would have the ability to do it? The concealment, erased images and Cold War tactics, capability to spoof Inmarsat data, Inmarsat technical environment. Inmarsat I-3F1 satellite handled the handshake. SATCOM terminal ID from MH370 could be replicated if intercepted/known. Spoof injection possible through ground station with access to Inmarsat network, special purpose RF uplink equipment. Potential actors with capability: 1. Nation states with SATCOM access, UK, Inmarsat HQ in London, US, intelligence access to Inmarsat network. China has worked with Inmarsat ground stations. 2. Military intelligence units. Any entity with SATCOM testbed capability could generate handshake simulations. Agencies with signal intelligence, SIGINT infrastructure, NSA, GCHQ, Chinese MSS. 3. Airline or SATCOM industry insiders, people with knowledge of aircraft SATCOM system IDs, access to test systems that can emulate aircraft connections. Key intersection. Whoever spoofed the Arcs needed both motive and means. Means is technical capability to spoof SATCOM. Motive could be asset/person/cargo on board worth diverting. If we rule out the obvious suspects, big states openly tied to Inmarsat, public-facing intelligence agencies, then we are left with something more subtle. A player operating in the shadows. High technical capability, able to spoof Inmarsat data cleanly enough that it passes as natural. Low visibility, not the kind of entity anyone will name publicly. What this line of reasoning points toward: a possible military black program using an existing nation's infrastructure, but not under normal command channels. Potentially a specialized contractor or partner lab, private sector capability, but military-level access. Possibly even be a joint operation where one nation provided technical access and another provided the geographic path cover. Why they'd be hard to pinpoint. These kinds of players don't advertise their capability. They test it on events that are politically coverable. They rarely leave an obvious signature because they work through the legitimate infrastructure. Inmarsat ground stations, SATCOM test environments, etc. They have plausible deniability. The public can always be pointed back toward the Southern Ocean story. If we assume that the route went north and spoofing occurred, then what anomalies might exist in satellite data and possible redactions along the timeline? The concealment, erased images and Cold War tactics, potential anomalies. Along the north route timeline, commercial Earth observation gaps. Expected commercial satellites, digital globe/Maxar planet, capture imagery over Andaman, Bay of Bengal, South Asia corridors. Observed few to no publicly accessible images from the exact dates and path corridor between March 8th to 9th, 2014. Known off-nadir images, side glances, sometimes flagged as cloud obscured, despite historical weather data showing clear conditions. Redaction signal, gaps in catalog during otherwise normal coverage cycles. Classified, defense imaging. US, China, India all have optical and radar satellites that would see a Boeing 777 moving north. Expected, some raw pass detections, heat, radar at key points. Observed, silence. India's radar and imagery over Andaman Sea never publicly released. It was reviewed internally. Redaction signal. No official or leaked imagery of Andaman northbound corridor despite multiple capable sensors. Inmarsat data releases. Expected. Raw ping logs for all pings. Before and after 1825 UTC SATCOM Re-Logon. Observed. Derived summaries, cleaned plots. No full bit level logs. Redaction indicator. UK AAIB release lacked raw frequency drift data, only smoothed averages. Redaction signal, lack of raw handshake frequency timestamps makes spoof detection impossible. Modus/Terra/Aqua gaps. Modus sensors, Terra and Aqua, overfly the equator daily, good for cloud and thermal detection. Expected, passes over Bay of Bengal and Andaman on March 8th. Observed, Modus granules show normal patterns but missing processed strips for sections near northern corridor latitudes. Data gap due to cloud, sometimes used as explanation. Redaction signal, processed data removed or substituted from archive, seen in other suppression events as well. Indian Ocean, south route oversaturation. Massive resources poured into southern Indian Ocean, ARC 7, based on Inmarsat ARCs. Possible reasons: keep southern imagery and data releases active to sustain credibility of the search narrative. Overwhelm alternate route discussions with southern search updates. Redaction signal, over-availability of southern ocean imagery versus total absence along possible northern corridors. If we follow the north route to its conclusion, what could have occurred? Airfield selection criteria. Long enough runway for a 777, minimum approximately 7,000 feet. Remote enough to avoid local detection. Controlled airspace, military or government facility. Hangar or covered storage available to avoid visual confirmation from space. Candidates often discussed: remote airfields in western China, Xinjiang, military bases in Kazakhstan, unpublicized runways along the Pakistan corridor, visual and radar concealment, Cold War precedent. When a defector's aircraft landed in another country, rapid hangaring or camouflaging was standard to prevent intelligence photos. Modern equivalent, satellite imagery gaps could be scheduled, retask satellites or insert cloud cover strips into public imagery. Radar tracks could be suppressed or overwritten in air defense networks. Satellite coverage gaps, post-landing, commercial. Digital globe, now Maxar, could have reduced or delayed image publication. Planet Labs wasn't at current resolution levels in 2014, meaning lower density of civilian passes. Military, US, Chinese, Russian satellites would have had pass windows over northern airfields. Imagery could be withheld or replaced for any area under sensitive operation. Visual redaction patterns. If MH370 landed north, we'd expect satellite imagery holes in weeks after March 8th over suspected fields. Modus, Landsat, and Sentinel public archives may show reprocessed strips with unusual cloud masking. Similar patterns were seen in Cold War retrieval ops, e.g. Soviet MiG captures, US drone crashes. MH370 post-landing airfields showing candidate northern airfields, Pakistan corridor, Xinjiang, Kazakhstan, along with suspected satellite imagery blackout zones for March-April 2014, shows pattern. This is exactly the type of pattern we'd expect if the aircraft was landed and moved into a hangar under Cold War-style concealment. Cold War parallel operations, immediate concealment after landing, Belenko's MiG-25 Foxbat defection, 1976. Event, Soviet pilot Viktor Belenko defected to Japan in a MiG-25. Concealment action, aircraft immediately moved to a secure hangar at Hakodate. Japanese and US officials restricted overflights and ground access. Why it matters, demonstrates rapid secure containment of high-value aircraft in foreign territory. Operation Hula Hoop, MiG-21 in Israel, 1966. Event, Iraqi pilot Munir Redfa defected to Israel in a MiG-21. Concealment action, aircraft flown to a secure Israeli base, quickly moved into a camouflaged hangar, satellite visibility minimized. Why it matters, perfect precedent for aircraft concealment during sensitive intelligence exploitation. Soviet Tu-95 Bear emergency landing, Cold War. Event, Soviet bomber made an emergency landing in a remote area. Concealment action. Aircraft covered in camouflage netting within hours. Imagery gaps noted in U.S. satellite archives for several days. Why it matters. Shows how imagery blackout windows were coordinated with physical concealment. CIA, Aqueduct, C-130 operations. Event, covert flights into denied areas during Cold War. Concealment action, aircraft landed at night, moved to hangars before first daylight pass. Satellite tasking adjusted to avoid accidental capture. Why it matters? Proves black programs use precise timing with orbital windows to keep aircraft hidden, parallel to MH370. These operations show that landing plus immediate concealment is standard procedure. Satellite pass planning is synchronized with ground concealment. Public imagery gaps are common side effects, exactly the kind of anomalies seen along MH370's possible northern route. This highlights how immediate hangaring, satellite blackout coordination, and imagery gaps are standard practice, making the MH370 scenario plausible in historical context. If MH370 landed at a remote northern site, signatures could still exist even after hangar concealment or relocation. Future search opportunities, modern detection methods, synthetic aperture radar, SAR. How it helps, penetrates clouds, can detect disturbed ground, taxiway changes, hangar modifications, useful for remote desert or steppe bases, Kazakhstan, Xinjiang. Tools, Capella Space, SR, sub 0.5 meter resolution, ICE-SR, persistent monitoring, revisit rates less than 12 hours. Opportunity, compare 2014 SAR baselines with current images for anomalies. Thermal infrared, TIR. Imaging, how it helps. Detects residual heat signatures from structures or underground facilities, useful for identifying hidden hangars or buried structures. Tools, Landsat 8/9, Tiers, Sentinel-3 SLSTR. Opportunity, identify unusual thermal retention patterns in airfields near candidate route. Ground penetrating radar from orbit, radar tomography. How it helps, detects subsurface voids or reinforced structures, concealed hangars, tunnels. Emerging capability ESA biomass and other missions will provide deep radar data. Tools, NISAR, NASA ISRO SR mission, 2025. ESA biomass mission can penetrate certain soils. Opportunity, could reveal hidden infrastructure around suspected bases. Change detection AI, how it helps. AI compares historical and present imagery for subtle changes. Taxiway resurfacing, earthworks. Tools, Planet Labs, plus Orbital Insight, Google Earth Engine, change detection scripts. Opportunity, identify modifications consistent with concealment or relocation. Crowdsourced, high-res imagery analysis. How it helps. Public researchers can comb imagery archives with AI assistance. Precedent, Tomnod crowdsourcing during initial MH370 search. Opportunity, with higher res imagery now available, a targeted crowdsourcing operation could inspect specific northern bases. The final question, did MH370 vanish, or was it made to? A decade later, the mystery endures. No recorders, no definitive debris from the official search zones, only data and questions. The seventh arc defines a theory, not a truth. Whether MH370 lies beneath the southern seas or vanished north under cover of silence, one fact remains. Technology told a story, but technology can also lie. Until evidence is found, one question continues to echo through the skies. Was it lost or hidden? Produced and researched by NextPath Studio. For more analyses, subscribe and explore the mysteries that challenge what we think we know.